There's a man who stands between the trees behind my house. I saw him the first week I moved in. I was washing a pan at the kitchen sink, and that window looked straight out at the backyard, and there he was. Past the lawn, past the shed, right at the place where the porch light quits and the woods start. Not in the trees, between two of them. I did what anybody would do. I shut the water off, watched him a minute, then went out on the back steps and hollered that this was private property. He didn't answer and he didn't leave. He stood there like a man waiting on a ride. I want to be honest about the first month because I think it matters. I wasn't scared. I was annoyed. I just bought the place. My name was still drawing on the closing paperwork, and I figured some neighbor had been cutting through those woods for 20 years and wasn't going to stop because a stranger moved in. So I did the practical things. I got a brighter bulb for the back fixture. That's when I noticed the first thing that didn't make sense. The new bulb pushed the light out maybe another 8 or 10 feet across the grass. And he moved. Not toward me. Sideways and back, so he was standing exactly where the light stopped again. I told myself he was avoiding the glare. That's a reasonable thing for a person to do. The next weekend I bought a floodlight. Cheap one, motion sensor, the kind that lights up half a block when a cat walks by. I mounted it over the back door, and I went out at dusk and waved my arm under it, and it came on hard and white. The light stopped in the same place. Not close to the same place. The same place. Same line across the grass, a little short of the shed, like somebody had drawn it there. The floodlight was throwing everything it had into that yard, and the yard was only taking so much of it. And he was standing right past the line. I want to be clear that I checked this. I took that same floodlight off the back of the house and mounted it out front, over the driveway, and it lit up the street, the mailbox, the neighbor's hedge, all of it. 90 feet easy. Same fixture, same bulb, same house. I put it back over the door. Behind the house it went about 40 feet and quit. That was the first night I slept with the bedroom door closed, which is a stupid thing to do, and I did it anyway. Here's where it gets harder to explain, and I've had a long time to practice. I mow with a push mower because the yard was small and I'm cheap. When I first bought the place, I timed it, not on purpose, just because I noticed the game was starting when I finished. About 40 minutes, front and back. By August, it was 25, and I wasn't going any faster. I'm 46 years old. Nobody gets faster in August. The hose was next. I keep a garden hose coiled on the spigot by the back steps, and when I moved in, it just barely reached the back fence. I remember stretching it and coming up a foot short of the corner post, and being irritated about it. That fall, I dragged it out, and it reached the fence with slack left over, enough to lay a loop of it in the grass. Same hose. I never bought another one. Then the shed. I keep a wheelbarrow behind it, and one day I went to pull the wheelbarrow through the gap between the shed and the fence, and it didn't fit. It had fit all summer. It fit in June. In October, I had to tip it up on one wheel and walk it out sideways. I stood there holding that wheelbarrow, and I got cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. The last thing was the survey pin. When you buy a place, they show you your corners. Mine was a metal pin sunk in the ground out past the fence in the scrub, a couple steps into the weeds. I'd found it the first week with a plat map in my hand, because I'm the kind of person who wants to see where his property ends. That October, the pin was sitting in mowed grass, on my side of the fence, in the lawn I'd been cutting all summer. Pins don't move. The fence hadn't moved, same posts, same rust, same sag in the same 3 spots. But my backyard was smaller than it had been in June, and everything in it was closer to the woods. That was the night I understood the thing I'd had backwards for 4 months. He wasn't getting closer. He hadn't taken a single step toward my house since the day I moved in. He held his distance from those trees, the way a man holds a spot in line. Everything else was moving. I was the one getting closer. Around then, the sound started. And the sound is the part that still gets me. because for a couple of seconds it was the best thing I'd heard in years. I was on the back steps in the dark, late, and I heard the interstate. That low hiss, way off, like a wind that never changes. I grew up 10 miles from I-40, and you could hear it in our backyard on damp nights. And I hadn't thought about that in 30 years, and my whole body just relaxed. I was 7 again, standing in wet grass in my socks. Then I turned my head and worked out where it was coming from. It was coming from the woods. There is no highway behind my house. The nearest one is 11 miles the other direction, on the far side of town, past the water tower, and it does not carry. The sound stayed faint.
That's what I can't get people to understand. It never got loud. It was just an ordinary, far-off highway sound, arriving from a direction that doesn't have one. I need to tell you about being 7, and I've told this story maybe 200 times, so bear with me while I tell it right for once. My cousin Robin was 9, and I was 7, and we walked into the woods behind my aunt's place, and we got lost. Simple as that. It got dark, we cried, we hollered, nobody heard us. The whole town turned out. Men came off their porches with flashlights and went in after us, and around 2 a.m, they walked us out, scratched up and filthy and fine. That's the story. That's the version. I've told it at cookouts and at work, and on 2 first dates. Robin does the part where I ate somebody's sandwich in the back of a truck and asked for another one. It's a good story. People laugh. And I always stop it right there. There was a man named Vern in that search. I never knew his last name, and I never met him. He was a volunteer, somebody's uncle, a guy who heard 2 kids were in the woods and put his boots on. They brought us out. He didn't come out. They looked for him for 4 days. State came in, dogs, the whole thing. They never found him, and they never found anything of his, and eventually people stopped saying his name in front of my aunt. Nobody told me to leave him out. There was no family secret, no rule. Nobody sat me down. I just told the story about the sandwich, over and over, for 39 years. And somewhere in there, the story became a version of that night where Vern was never in it at all. I didn't decide that. I want that understood. I never once made the decision. That's the part that keeps me up. Not that I lied, that I didn't have to. In November, I heard the counting. It came out of the woods around 11 p.m, and it was so ordinary I almost went back inside. A man's voice, far off, said a number. Not shouted, just pitched to carry, the way you'd call to somebody in the next room. Then another voice, farther along and off to the left, said the next number. Then another, farther still, quieter, almost gone. It moved. That's what I mean by ordinary. The numbers traveled through the dark, from one place to the next place, spaced out, unhurried. And the whole thing had the flat sound of tired men doing a job they'd done before. And I remembered. When they searched for us, the men went in spread out in a line. Far enough apart to cover ground, close enough to keep track of each other's lights. Every so often they'd count off down the line, one voice to the next, so nobody wandered off his spot and left a hole. I remembered lying in the dirt with Robin, hearing numbers come through the trees, and thinking that was the sound of being found. So the first night I heard it behind my house, God help me, I felt better. By December, there was scrub inside my fence, little sprigs of it coming up through grass I'd mowed in the fall. By January, there were trees. Not big ones, thin gray things about wrist thick, standing in my lawn on my side of the chain link, and the fence was still where it had always been, and I could still walk out to the road and check my mailbox like a normal man. He was maybe 60 feet from my back steps by then. I went out to him on a Tuesday. I don't have a good reason. I'd been looking at the back of that man's head for 6 months is the closest thing I've got. I walked out with a flashlight I didn't turn on, past the shed,
past the little trees that shouldn't have been there, up to the edge of where the floodlight quit, and I stopped about 15 feet short of him. Work jacket, brown, the heavy kind, boots, a cap,
A long flashlight hanging down in his right hand pointed at the ground, not on. He never turned around. And standing that close, I finally saw the thing I'd had wrong for 6 months. And it went through me worse than anything else that year. He wasn't facing my house. He had his back to it. He'd had his back to it the entire time. Every night I'd stood at my sink feeling watched, that man had been looking away from me, into the trees. He had never once been looking at my house. While I was standing there, he moved, barely. He turned his head a few inches to his left toward the empty dark beside him, the way you check on somebody who's supposed to be next to you. Then he faced front again. I walked back inside and locked a door that had never done anything for me. The last night was 3 weeks later. The trees were up against the steps by then. I could touch bark from my own back door. And he was close. Close enough that I could hear him breathe, and he was still facing away. I went out. I don't know why I went out. I got about 10 feet from him, and I looked to my left. There was another man. Same kind of jacket, same stillness, maybe 40 feet down, holding his own spot. Past him, another one. Past that one, another, dimmer, and then just the suggestion of one, and then dark, going on longer than any woods behind any house has a right to go. I turned my head right, and it was the same. Men spaced out in the dark, every one of them facing into the trees, going out until I couldn't tell shape from shadow. It was never one man watching my house. It was one position in a line, and the line had been out there the whole time. Then the counting started, and it was coming toward me. Far off on the right, a number. Closer, the next one. Closer than that. Not fast, regular, patient. One voice handing off to the next, exactly the way I'd heard it when I was 7 and lying in the dirt praying it would get closer. The man nearest me said his number. Just a tired man's voice, 3 feet of fog in front of his face. And then nothing. Because the next spot in that line was where I was standing. I could feel it, the way you feel a room waiting on you to talk. The whole line was holding, all of it, out into the dark on both sides, for one number, from one position. I didn't answer. I still can't tell you why, and I still don't know what would have happened if I had. Maybe nothing. Maybe I'd have just been a man standing in his yard saying a number out loud. I've thought about it every week for 2 years, and I've never once been sure I did the right thing. I only know I didn't do it. I walked backward until my heel hit the bottom step, and I went inside. And I sat in the kitchen with the lights off until the sky went gray. In the morning, it was a backyard. Lawn, dead and flat for February. Shed where a shed goes. Plenty of room for the wheelbarrow. Chain link fence, same sag. Tree line 40 yards back where it belonged. I dragged the hose out, and it came up a foot short of the corner post, exactly like the day I bought the place. I went out past the fence into the scrub and found the survey pin sunk in the weeds where the plat map said it was. No footprints. No flattened grass. Nothing dropped, nothing left, no name. Nothing I could put on a table in front of another person. I moved that spring. Took a loss on it and didn't care. I'm fine, mostly.
I have an apartment now, second floor, and I sleep all right, and I go to work, and I cook, and I see people. Nothing about my life would look wrong to you. But there's a thing I do now, and I can't stop doing it. When I'm outside around dusk, I keep track of how far away people are from me. Not who they are, how far. The guy at the other end of the parking lot, the woman waiting at the crosswalk, somebody walking a dog on the far sidewalk.
I know the distance without measuring it, and if it holds steady too long, I move. And I don't decide to move any more than I decided to stop telling people about Vern. And when I see somebody standing still right where a light ends, at the edge of a lot, or under the last lamp on a street, I don't think they're waiting for a bus. It looks to me like they're holding a place for somebody. I know that's just me. I know that's what 6 months in that house did to my head, and that other people look at a man standing under a light and see a man standing under a light. I just can't get there anymore.